Bună seara, good evening. În această seară, sau în această după-amiază, am avut o proiecție. Înainte de orice, vreau să mă trebuie în regulă, să vorbim toată, să fie discuția în limba engleză, direct, fără traducere, fiindcă economisim un pic de timp. Okay, so I will also say directly in English my introduction. In that case, so thank you for coming. It's a special moment for us, for World Romania, because not only because we just screened one of the greatest documentaries ever made, the Sarah and the Pity by Marcel Ophüls, but also because the person who selected the film is Ian Buruma, who is here with us. He's one of our special guests. And I want to thank him very much for accepting our invitation and for selecting 4 films that you are going to see if you will join us. And this discussion follows this screening, which just ended 15 minutes ago. Together with Mr. Ian Buruma, we have Radu Jude, the filmmaker Radu Jude, who I don't think needs many presentations, and Adrian Cioflâncă, who will moderate the debate. So, thank you very much for accepting the invitation, and I wish you a great discussion with our audience.
So, I'm supposed to be the moderator of this discussion. I have to admit that I'm pretty nervous. I have no idea what are we going to discuss about. Let's try something. So, our main guest is the historian Ian Buruma. He is born in 1951 in the shadow of the Second World War. And we are here to discuss also about a documentary movie about the shadows of the Second World War and of the Holocaust in France and in the rest of Europe. Mr. Buruma is half English, half German, half Jewish, half Dutch, half American, half Japanese. Apparently he has more halves than the rest of us. So he can decide to be whoever he wants. But these days, the age of imperative identity comes back, so you have to make up your mind. So he is born in Netherlands, but he studied in Japan for a while. He studied literature in Netherlands and film in Japan, and he also worked for many years as a photographer, as a filmmaker, and in the second part of his life, he started to write history books. Some of them are translated in Romanian. I have 2 of them here. This one, plain book on the year 1945, the year zero of the new age after the war, and this one, which is written together with Avishai Margalit about the idea of the Western world. So the film we are going to discuss and to be the beginning of our discussion was released in 1969, and Ari Russo's book on the Vichy pogrom was published 8 years after that. So it is usually said that Rousseau's book on the Vichy syndrome is a turning point in the public perception in France and a turning point in the post-war memory. But the film was not accepted in France for more than 10 years. Its premiere was in Germany. So there was a sort of a censorship in France, a sort of a resistance against the movie because
Mother forbidden.
Yes, he was a minister of culture at that time. He resisted the idea of screening the movie in France because of the myth of French resistance, which was the dominant myth in France. So it seems to me that sometimes the artists are more courageous than historians in dealing with the difficult parts. So Radu here made several films on the difficult recent past. So I suppose he created more movies than books published in Romania on the history of the Holocaust in the last 5 years, let's say. So why is that? Why the artists made the first step in provoking the public memory, in provoking the public myth of a nation?
Well, the artists. But it was, well, yeah, was the film released in 1969 or 68? Was it 69? In any case, that wasn't for nothing, because the darker pages of World War II began to be discussed everywhere, really only in the 1960s. That was true in Germany, it's true in France and in many other places. It took the discussion of World War II, even in Japan, the discussion of World War II only really got going with the student rebellions and things of the 1960s, because it was a way to question your parents. And I don't think it was ever banned in France, so I don't think you should say it was censored. I think it was shown in a small cinema in Rue Sainte-Anne or something on the left bank, but it was not allowed to be shown on French television. And it wasn't just Malraux, it was also Simone Weil, who had no reason to be shy about what the French had done during World War II. She herself was deported to Auschwitz. But I think there was, and that's a little bit part of what my book was about, after every war and every dictatorship, countries, of course, are very divided between those who were in favor of the dictator and those who were against. Your neighbor may have denounced you, and so on and so forth. And it's very difficult to cobble countries together again after those things. There's always a risk of civil war, violence, revenge, and all that. And that was especially true in France. So de Gaulle very consciously took the political decision to pretend that everybody had been in the resistance and to forget about the past. And it was really about making sure that post-war France would develop into a peaceful country, democracy. And he was afraid that the 60s was still too early to open up those old wounds, which was unwise at that stage. It was not too early. I think before Rousseau, which actually confirms your point, it was actually a foreign historian who first started writing about Vichy. It was Robert Paxton, an American. And that also happens in other countries. The British historians were the first really to write big books about Mussolini and so on in Italy before the Italians wanted to tackle it. And in Italy it's still an issue. It's still, they haven't really resolved it in those who were pro-fascist, those who were anti-fascist. And underneath the surface there's still a lot of ill-feeling and so on. So this doesn't answer your question about why artists are more courageous. I don't think they always are. I think artists are often just as cowardly as everybody else. But I'll leave the answer to this question to you.
Well, I don't know, because I cannot speak generally. I think one can speak only I can speak only for myself. And actually, the reason I've done the film, it's the films which deal with this dark past, do not have anything to do with trying to provoke or trying to, how should I say, be more courageous in a way than others, because I don't even think that nowadays, in the times we live, it's such a brave thing to make a film on the Holocaust or the slavery of the Roma or something like that. But I really think that this desire to tackle these topics comes from the fact that from a kind of anger that you feel, or my generation, people from my generation, your generation, older generation as well, can feel because the fact that we were lied all the time on all the possible ways. I mean, if we take the topic of the Romanian involvement in the Shoah, in the Holocaust, it's something that I found out when I was almost 20 years old. And before that, all the things that we found out regarding the recent history were heroical narratives, heroical stories, a bunch of lies, actually. So after a while, you can get angry, and eventually, in these years, this anger transformed itself into the desire to make this film. It wasn't immediately. I mean, when I was 19 or 20 years old, I never said, well, in 20 years I will make a film about that. No, it crystallizes recently. And what you said about the 60s is interesting because Mr. Bujica, when I showed him my last film, which deals with that, he even said this to me. He said, it's like you're exactly the same thing what artists in Germany did in the 60s happens now in Romania, I mean, much more later. And I think it's much more later because the discussion was only for 1 or 2 years after the Second World War. I think it was Lucrece Patroșcanu who tackled the topic in a book. It was the Black Book of the Holocaust by we don't remember the name, Matthias Karpen, but this was only for 1 or 2 years, and then it was gone. So we discovered that later, and also as a filmmaker, you feel that, or I felt that if there would have been, like in, I don't know, in Germany or in other places, because in Japan it's not, as you wrote about, if there would have been, I don't know, 100 films or 100 books about this topic, probably it wouldn't have been interesting to touch the topic.
Well, actually, in Japan in the 1940s and 50s, there were more films that dealt honestly with the war than there were in Germany. And in Japan, it was very political. If you were on the left, you would question very much what the Japanese did during the war. If you were a right-wing nationalist, you'd stay away from the subject. But I would say one other thing. I think the distinction between artists on the one hand and historians or writers or intellectuals or whatever you want to call it on the other is a false one. I think that the distinction is between serious people and unserious people. If you're a serious artist or a serious historian or a serious writer, you're interested in telling the truth as you see it and be honest about it. If you're a hack, then you're just, you pump out entertainment or you do what the government tells you and so on. And as far as that's concerned, there's no difference between artists or non-artists or artists and even academics. I mean, if you're serious, then you're serious about the truth. And if you're serious about the truth, you're often going to say things that are unpopular.
Also, I think there's something else, at least in Romania. Maybe I'm wrong, and maybe Adrian can tell me if I'm wrong. It's maybe that's something to discuss. It's the attitude of the people who comes from history or I don't know, philosophy, history of any kind, sociology, this kind of disciplines toward images, generally speaking, which I found that in Romania it's almost there's no interest in that. I mean, regarding the topic I touched in my films, there's no all the history books, all the discussions, even what Adrian wrote, they never or almost never mention images into that. And I discovered, and I put in my last film a lot of some archive materials which are I found very, very important and very revealing from some point of view, and I was the only one for some of them to ever mention. I mean, any historian, any philosopher, or any kind of intellectual who thought about these subjects, he or she never took into consideration the images. And I found this to be something which is a pity in a way, because images, I don't know, film, photography, montage, editing of images, which is something else, can bring different types of knowing, of cunoaștere, of connaissance, knowledge, which is not necessarily revealed through other means. And for instance, what I admire in your work is that it's what you are one of the few, and you don't have too many people to compare you with in Romania from this point of view. At least you are somebody who are, and we're always interested in images and the relationship. And I would ask you something about that.
Well, I think images are especially important in countries like Romania, because if you lived in Western Europe or in the United States, you had the luxury that you could at least try and show the truth. Whether you were a photographer or a filmmaker or an artist, you weren't censored. Whereas the film that you made, which is all about the official imagery of the Ceausescu period, shows that we lived in a society where the images themselves were constantly lying to you. So the images are a kind of alternative reality. And if you were not allowed to challenge that alternative reality, then you live in a very different society than in one way you're at least allowed to show something that may or may not be true. And so I think imagery plays an even more important role in a country that has a history of dictatorship.
There was also a debate, because you also recommended the Claude Lanzmann film, and it's something I would like to know your opinion about, because Georges Berman wrote a book about that called Images in Spite of All, and it's about the 4 images, the 4 photographs that were saved from a Sonderkommando who succeeded in sending them to the Polish resistance, and it's the only visual images from a gas chamber. And it was a famous Godard and Lanzmann, which didn't result in anything, and they called Lanzmann after making Shoah, which consists of long testimonies, long interviews, said something about these photographs and also something about possible films showing the extermination in a gas chamber. I mean, essentially what Lanzmann said was like, we don't need these images because I made Shoah, and the power of the words and of testimony is beyond what an image can show. And even if we would find a film showing the extermination in a gas chamber, I would destroy it immediately because it doesn't prove anything, and we don't need it in order to represent Shoah. What do you think of that?
I was living in Berlin for a year in 1991 when they opened up the museum in the Wannsee Villa, which was the museum where they had that meeting to work out the logistics of the Jewish deportations and mass murder. And they'd opened this museum, and on the wall were photographs taken, when they're famous photographs, taken by Germans in the SS and so on, of women, naked women being shot over open pits, atrocities like that. And there were various opinions on this. Some said it's very important to show those images so that people really understand what was going on and will never forget and so on. And it was a perfectly respectable argument. There were others who were saying those Germans who were taking those pictures of those naked women before they were being machine gunned were doing it as an extra humiliation of those women. And why are we humiliating them again, even though they're dead, by showing them to the public on the walls of this museum, which is also a respectable argument. I think, and I don't think one is completely wrong or the other is completely right, But I'm with Lanzmann on this because sometimes the suggestion of something is stronger than actually seeing it. Because, for example, in Steven Spielberg's movie Schindler's List, he has it's not a bad film, but there's one scene where they reenact what went on in a gas chamber, which you can't do because you can never show what really happened. And as a viewer, you can never really feel it either. And the more you try to show it realistically, the more, in some ways, it fails. And I remember, to write a book about war memory, I visited Auschwitz. And I remember, and people get very sentimental about it, and sort of say, well, I went to Auschwitz, and suddenly I broke down and cried, and so on and so forth, which was not my reaction at all, because seeing those barracks, and I saw them just after Steven Spielberg had them painted over as a set for his movie, you cannot feel what it was like. You can see it, but it doesn't really mean anything. And I remember I had two reactions. One was a completely irrational reaction that I was tempted to pick up a stone and sort of stick it in my pocket as though it had some mystical significance because it was a stone in Auschwitz. The other thing, apart from the fact that I didn't break down and cry, or I even had a particularly emotional response, there was one moment that I did, and it was after leaving the camp, and I went to the railway station to go back to Krakow, and suddenly I heard the sound of a train, and then suddenly I felt it, I started to shiver. So the suggestion is actually, can be much stronger than trying to actually see in a photograph or something like that what happened.
Yeah, but they speak about different things, not about an artistic effect which can be achieved, but about the proof of something. And I think a proof, I don't know, I'm asking because sometimes, for instance, Adrian was my consultant. No, cheers. Adrian was the consultant for my last film, the one which deals with the memory, lack of memory of Odessa massacre. At some point I have in the film a detail on a photograph from Odessa massacre. So he researched, he sent me 2 or 3 or 4, 10 photographs, I chose one, I shot it, I edited the film, and then Adrian watched it, researched again a little bit more to be sure, and said to me, look, I found out that the photographs that I've given to you, which perfectly fit into the film, is not from Odessa, it's from Lithuania, something like that. And he sent me another photograph, and we had to do again this kind of thing. And well, it's really, I felt not only, I felt a little bit shocked and a little bit scared, but how powerful an image can be in tricking you, actually. I mean, you see the truth of, the representation of a historical thing as a proof, and it fits perfectly into the context that you apply to it, and after a while you discover that it's actually fake. But otherwise, I don't know, can an image be a proof of something?
Well, this is why Susan Zontag wrote the book on photography, protesting the use of the excessive use of photography in movies and storytelling. But we have a second example, and we can say more. We discovered on eBay 3 or 4 years ago an album of victims of the Iași pogrom, and this is our next project. And the album has photos and names only, but no story attached. So we research, and the next movie of the Iași pogrom is researching using other tools, digitalized archives, indexed databases, to reconstruct somehow biographies for some of the victims. And sometimes at least the story of their death. So the troubling result for this is, in the case of 14,000 victims of the pogrom, that was the first big massacre of when the Barbarossa operation started. So out of 14,000 victims, we found photos and stories for 200 people, and that's it. So it's clear that we have a deficit of images, and it is also, and at this point, Susan Zonag is right, in the case of the Holocaust in Romania, most of the photos were taken by the perpetrators. So this is a clear extension of their aggression, because it's a proof of their zeal, of their accomplished mission. It's a tool of humiliation. Of course, the photos don't speak for themselves, but they realized after several months of using photos against victims, they realized that the same photos can be used at the same time against the regime. So we can see in the reports of the police their care of collecting all the photos in the city.
Because there are proofs.
There are proofs at the same time. So, in terms of memory, in the case of Romania, we have, let's say, 4 periods after the war. We have this short period of openness Radu mentioned, when some memoirs and press articles were published. And after that, we have a pretty long period of ideological taboo, but with two paradoxically different stories. In the first half of the communist period, there is this discourse against the fascist regime and so on. But after that, when Ceausescu, in the second half of the regime, when Ceausescu rediscovered nationalism, when some of the intellectuals of the Antonescu era were rediscovered, there is Securitatea played totally opposite discourse to the one mentioned by the same Securitatea in the first half of the communist regime. After that, after the revolution, the 1989 revolution, we had a period of ambivalence, and after that, after the Wiesel Commission and so on, the archives were open, but in the pause in the last 10 years, we cannot say that there is let's say, an evolution of perception, important change of public memory in terms of perception of the Holocaust. Coming back to the film we are discussing, so the troubling finding of the film is that for most of the French and for most of the people in Europe, ambivalence, caution, opportunism were the rational choices of those moments. And we right now realize that dictatorship is coming back in some of the countries around us, and we realize that people are more tolerant to dictatorship than we used to accept, than our misstance to say. So why is that?
Well, most people are not heroes, and you can't expect them to be. I mean, if you're French and you're living in 1940 or even 1941, you didn't know that the war would ever end or that the Germans would lose, and they could have gone on for decades. You have to make your life, and people who stick their necks out and take big risks are not always good people. I mean, some of them are young and they're adventurers and want excitement. Some of them are zealous communists. I mean, people resist for all kinds of different reasons. It's not always because they're kind-hearted and wonderful people, and those who do not stick their necks out are bad people. You can't. That's when I grew up in the Netherlands in the primary school in the 50s. That's still the view of World War II that we were taught, that everybody in Holland had been brave and had resisted the Germans and everybody had been a hero and so on, which of course was complete nonsense. But you can't blame people for trying to protect their families, for not taking big risks. And in fact, at the time, in very difficult periods, I don't have to tell Romanians this, I mean, people who do resist are often not popular because they can provoke actions from the occupier or the dictatorship that hurt other people. And also they make people feel guilty. I mean, people who do resist make people who look the other way, who are not brave, feel that somehow they're embarrassed. And so resistors are never very popular. But they're still important. I don't think that resistance in France or anywhere else brought the end of the war any nearer. I don't think they had any real military significance. But they have a significance for two reasons, resistance. One is that they show the occupier or the dictatorship that they're not all-powerful, that resistance is possible. And so, which is very important, because I think control of countries, whether it's a colonial situation or an occupation, you can never do it just by brute force. You have to convince people who are being controlled that this is the normal way of life. And resistance, and acts of resistance show that it isn't normal. The other thing is for the morale after the dictatorship or after the war, that people can point to these acts of resistance to show that some people did still stand up. And then you can build a society on that memory. If nobody stood up, it's much harder.
On the other hand, I would like to ask you, because I read your book on the assassination of the filmmaker Theo van Gogh. And what I found very striking is the fact that he was a filmmaker, right? But many of the films he did and of the videos he did were done to provoke. They were very provocative. And it was a case that was discussed, we discussed it regarding this topic. People discussed it all over the world after Charlie Hebdo massacre and so on. And I would like you to ask, do you think limit of responsibility? It's always a tricky question that I ask myself all the time, and I'm asking when I see not only the Theo van Gogh film, but other kinds of films like Kazuo films that you also mentioned and you know personally, Hara and so on. I'm not saying it's the same thing. I'm saying he's pushing forward the provocation, and should be a limit to that. Should be a responsibility. What do you think?
Well, first of all, Hara is a great filmmaker. Theo van Gogh was not. But nobody should be killed for being a bad filmmaker. Nor should you
I would be the first one to be
nor should you be killed for being a provocateur. So I don't think you can blame Van Gogh for being murdered. It makes the story more complicated and interesting and so on, but I don't think that you can really say that he asked for it or anything like that. I mean,
but regarding Jamil, this is exactly what people say here.
Yes, but I think that's wrong. Whether you should give Charlie Hebdo, it became a big discussion in New York because the PEN organization decided to give them a prize for, I think, journalism or something like that, bravery in journalism. Whether that was right or not is another question. But I don't think you can really say that because Charlie Hebdo was provocative, maybe even dangerously close to encouraging anti-Muslim feelings or anything like that, that's no excuse for murder. And also they were very democratic in their provocations because they were just as much making fun of the Catholic Church as they were of Islam. Now that raises another question, and I'd love to know what you think, but I don't have a claim to have a clear answer to this question. The woman who wrote the script for Theo van Gogh's short movie called Submission was a Somali woman who then became a naturalized Dutch woman called Ian Buruma. And it was not a good script. It was provocative and so on. And the film was about, it was called Submission, and it showed naked women with verses of the Quran on their backs, and I think even showed them being whipped or something of that sort. It was not a subtle message or a good film. And she went further in provoking, and she now lives in America, and she's married to a famous historian. And I was critical of her, which got me into a lot of trouble, because she would go so far as to say, it's not just the extremists, the West is at war with Islam, and so on and so forth. And she was praised for being the Voltaire of our time. A famous historian at Princeton called her that. She's the Voltaire of our time, because like Voltaire, she dared to attack organized religion, in her case, Islam. Now that raised the question, because Voltaire, in his time, was attacking one of the most powerful institutions in France, the Catholic Church. They had real power, and it was very risky to attack them. Is it the same thing as attacking a minority in a European country which is already vulnerable and marginalized and so on? Now, there are some who say you shouldn't make any distinction. Any target is legitimate. You should never make an exception just because people are members of the minority and so on. It should all be the same. I'm not so sure about this, because I think free speech does depend in our daily lives on circumstances. Minorities can make jokes about themselves that members of the majority could not do in good taste. A politician or a diplomat can't say the same things as a comedian. It used to be the case that the President of the United States had to be careful about his language, whereas a novelist could be less cautious. Now it's the other way around. Now the President of the United States can say anything he likes, but if you're a comedian or a novelist and you get one word wrong on a minority or women or something, out you go. But I don't want to go there right now.
But, you know, I totally agree with what you say, that it should be, that majority should be responsible for minority, and we had this topic discussed very widely a few months ago when Romania held, I consider it a very, very shameful event, which was a referendum, which was so-called for the protection of the family, which actually it was towards the gay, the eventual gay rights. And the referendum wasn't validated in the end because of the lack of quorum. But what was interesting, it was even big intellectuals, important Romanian intellectuals well, many of them supported the referendum, saying, filmmakers, philosophers, saying, I will vote yes because I want to protect the family and so on. But what was for me more striking, because afterwards, even very, I don't know, people like Andrei Pleșu, for instance, who wrote a text and said, yes, I didn't vote, but I must say that both sides used dirty language or bad arguments or attacked the others. And I always felt that this is really wrong, because it's not two sides. It was a majority who tried to impose something on a minority, and when that minority answered maybe in an unpolite way, immediately somebody who belonged to the majority said, look, they do not behave. So both sides were wrong. And I don't get the feeling there were two sides in that referendum story.
No, that may be so, but again, minorities, it's a tricky question. There's no excuse for hostile humor, let's say, about gays, because being gay is having a particular sexual disposition. That's the way you are. It's not a choice. It's not an ideology. It's not a religion. It's an existential matter. Same if you make jokes about people's race. That's never in good taste because you're attacking people for the color of their skin when they're born. Now, how should we think when it comes to religion? Salman Rushdie made the distinction. He said, you must never attack individual Muslims for being Muslims, but you can say anything you like about Islam. That sounds very reasonable. The problem with religion is that unlike political ideology, for people who believe it is existential, for a really devout Muslim or indeed Christian, if you attack their religion, from their point of view, you're attacking them. Because it's what they think, it's a very essential part of who they think they are. Now, should we then say, well, then we have to be particularly careful about religion and not be critical or not satirize it? Or I don't know. Myself, I'd be a little bit more cautious about religion perhaps than about politics, about a political ideology, but I don't say this with great conviction.
In one interview, you mentioned, you spoke about the contemporary forgetting. So it seems that we have a new generation, the first new generations who don't care about the Second World War, about the past, the troubled past of the 20th century. But at the same time, paradoxically, the forgetting is favoring the revival of some of the interwar extremism. So, how can we explain this mixture of forgetting and nostalgia for different types of extremism?
Well, it's a complicated question. I've never believed in that famous dictum that people always quote, that those who forget about the past are destined to repeat it. I don't think that just by constantly repeating the horrors of the past, we're going to be more likely to avoid it in the future. I mean, I think human beings are capable of doing enormous harm, and they'll do it whether you remember what happened in the past or not. But it is very difficult to understand the present without knowing the past. And I also think, and this may contradict what I said just now, but that after World War II, there were at least two generations, and maybe three, who, conscious of the horrors of the past, were very keen to try and build a world in which it would no longer be possible, which may be an illusion, but they did try that. And so the European Union, or unified Europe, was one way of trying to do that, to make sure that Germany and France would never go to war again. And the reason for an integrated Europe had everything to do with what happened in 2 world wars. Now, the one reason that the British never felt the same about this is that they said, well, but, you know, our country was never occupied. We won the war. Why should we join with our democracy with these continental Europeans who've all had these, you know, very different paths? But I think it's very difficult now to convince somebody who's 20 that they should be in favor of European integration just because of World War II. It doesn't mean enough to them. And that's inevitable. I mean, if you told my generation that, you know, we had to do something because of World War I, it wouldn't have had the same resonance as people who were closer to that time. So you have to think of another reason, and not just history, for having the institutions that we have today.
So, why are you making movies about such a far past? Because it it seems to be relevant for some of the, for most of the people.
Well, apart from what I explained before, I really believe, and it's something I'd like to discuss with you, to hear your opinion on that, is that cinema, if we speak about cinema, we can speak about different things, can offer a different type of thinking about certain problems, which is not the same for other disciplines, for other arts, for other things. So, for instance, I was always somehow thinking that you can express with cinema. For instance, I was showing yesterday a short film I've done with the execution of Marcel Ophüls, and I cross-edited the film with a version of this execution from a propaganda film about Marcel Antonescu made by Sergiu Nicolaescu, and I was thinking that, for instance, you have editing as a device in filmmaking, and montage or editing is something that really can create a certain type of knowledge, a certain type of seeing the world, which doesn't really belong, or not, it doesn't belong so natural to other fields. And it's a strong belief I have, which I may be wrong, that cinema can offer this in a way that other things cannot offer. And you showed an example here, I mean all the other films, but there's a particularly striking film which I'm not sure if it was screened, the Peter Forga film, it will be screened, Maelstrom, which it's using montage, the filmmaker creates an idea that you can really see, you can see on the screen how an idea is created by putting together some images, in this case it's some amateur footage from the World War II in Holland, and you can see a family, a Jewish kind of rich family making amateur films, while around them the Holocaust was starting to happen, and it seems like they didn't see anything, they didn't feel anything coming. And at the same time you can see, and this is more troubling in a way, images, also homemade images from Zeiss Ingvard, who was the governor of occupied Holland, and he also had a family and kids, and the images seem the same. And when you put together this kind of images, I think you can create a way, an image of history, an image of the world, an image of, you can create ideas which is much more difficult to create using other media.
No, I agree, and I think it's very, well, the other thing about which film has in common, I think, with fiction, literature, is that, and that's one of the most valuable things it can do, is that it can make the viewer or the reader climb into the mind of other people. So that, and other people, not only other individuals, but people from a different community even. So your film actually makes people identify in a way, not with his character maybe, but it makes people see the world, what it's like to be persecuted as a gypsy. And I think empathy with other people, being able to imagine what it's like to be somebody else, is essential to being a civilized human being. And that's a role that cinema certainly has. I mean, as far as history is concerned, cinema is, I think, a double-edged thing. It can make us understand the past better than we could otherwise. But I think it goes much further than that. I think for many people, history now, the only view they have of the past is through the cinema. I mean, Ronald Reagan's idea of World War II was entirely from the perspective of Hollywood movies. But that's now true of everybody. And that may or may not be a bad thing. Again, it makes you feel strongly about people in the past. Sometimes sentimental movies can work on one's emotions about the past better than more serious art. I mean, speaking for myself, and I think that is
more serious.
Than sentimental movies? Well, I'll give you an example. Two examples, and I think that shows probably my generation as much as my background. I can't watch Casablanca and the scene of the French woman who sings the Marseillaise and when all the Germans are singing their march without crying. And the same thing is The Longest Day. Not the greatest film ever made. It's a sentimental Hollywood picture. But when I see Robert Mitchum with his cigar and John Wayne wading through the surf on the beaches of Normandy, I cry like a baby, which I probably wouldn't with a more profound film. And I'll give you an even more poignant example. We were talking about how in the 1960s, or a little later even, people started to talk about the war in different countries. What really got the discussion going in Germany was a Hollywood television series called Holocaust. And it was a soap opera. It was just a soap opera, quite well done, but nothing more, nothing less. And intellectuals criticized it very much, said, well, this is outrageous, this cheap American soap opera about the Holocaust, and how can people take that seriously? It was the first time Germans began to talk about it. And the reason they began to talk about it, and this tells you a lot about the nature of cinema, is that if you talk about 6 million Jews who were murdered, it's like arithmetic, it's a number, it's a sum, it's abstract. But seeing a soap opera, week after week, you start to identify with these characters. They become real people. And for the first time, these Jews who are being persecuted in Germany become people for the television view. And that's very important. So then they started asking questions to their parents, then they became family discussions, often very painful, but that's what got the whole thing going, a cheap soap opera. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, well, to be honest, I have a different opinion on that, because I think Baudrillard wrote, to my mind, a very important text about exactly the Holocaust soap opera. And the point he made, and I think he's right, was that even if people started to talk about, for many people, because apparently it was extremely successful, for many people, probably the most of people, this will erase the memory of the Holocaust, or the real Holocaust, or the other type of memories, and will put into their minds the memory that they have from watching this soap opera. So, in a way, they will transform the Holocaust in a soap opera, and eventually people will only have this. And I somehow must admit that I found this argument valid, and also in another type of less serious thing. For instance, when I was a teenager, there was a very bad film, in my opinion, called Shakespeare in Love. And people used to say, well, but it's very well that they made a film like that, because people will start reading Shakespeare. And this never happened. On the contrary, when they go and see a Shakespeare, people said, but I want you to be like Shakespeare in Love. So I think that maybe Baudrillard is right, and this kind of emotional involving people into a visual product or other type of product is wrong.
Well, I'm very glad we disagree, because otherwise it would be very boring as a discussion. I view Baudrillard's view a little bit as typical French intellectual arrogance, because a learned scholarly essay about the Holocaust, or a book full of statistics, or maybe more accurate, maybe more scholarly, etc., but most people are not going to read those in any case. And again, I think one of the most important things about the past, about the history of persecution, about horrors and so on, is empathy. Is that you can with your imagination, get some idea of what it must have been like. And you don't get that necessarily from an intellectual text or an analysis of Baudrillard, but you could get it through a soap opera. And since more people watch soap operas than read Baudrillard, probably thank goodness, I don't think that's a bad thing. If if it appeals to people's imagination and they get even an idea of the past through that, that's all to the good, in my view.
So maybe we should start making soap operas again?
No, I didn't say that. I didn't say that. But I don't think it replaces history either, because it doesn't stop people from making, more profound films like you do, or to write essays, or to write scholarly history.
Probably for most, this remains the only thing that they
yeah, but they wouldn't read. It's more than nothing, and it would be nothing otherwise. And the scholarly histories, most people are not going to read those. And again, I think there are two ways of thinking about or making people think about reality, whether it's reality in the past or in the present. One is analysis and intellectual reflection and interpretation and scholarship, which is very important. The other is to appeal to people's imagination. And I think both are very important. And so to dismiss one and say, well, that replaces everything else, I think it's a mistake, because it doesn't replace anything. The other stuff is still there, but most people who would have watched Holocaust on TV would not have looked at that other stuff anyway.
Yeah, probably, but
I've convinced you.
No. It's the same. It's like when André Rieu comes with the concerts and everybody goes, and people say, well, it's good because starting from this, people will go to more serious concerts, and
no, that's probably not true.
People go to another concert and they want it to be like André Rieu.
Well, I agree with you about André Rieu. Even though he's a fellow countryman of mine, I can't stand André Rieu. I think the criticism of André Rieu is indeed the people who say, well, it's better than nothing because people who go and see him will then want to go to hear the Berlin Phil, playing Schubert. That's of course does not happen on the whole. But you could take another view. You could say, well, if that allows them to enjoy music, schlocky though it may be, that's better than not listening to music at all.
Well, I think I prefer them not to listen to music
Well,
at
that's
all.
very different.
Yes, and I think it happens the same with the Holocaust miniseries. After that, most of the people will watch a Claude Lanzmann film and they will say, but I want it to be like a soap opera.
But the most of the people who watched the soap opera wouldn't have gone to see Shoah anyway.
Well, but
it's a different
maybe
audience.
it's more important, I would think, maybe I'm wrong, to try to educate or to bring people to watch a film like Shoah and dismiss a film like the Holocaust, the miniseries.
Well, I'm glad you're not a cultural commissar.
Maybe we over-evaluate the power of movies, because it's commonly accepted that the change of perception in the 60s came together with like huge political changes, huge social movements, and somehow some of these films and books interfered with the larger trends. So maybe to have a sort of a crisis of conscience, which changed the perceptions in the 60s, and in the second phase in the 80s, we need politics to, and we need generational and social movements to have an impact, and maybe the films only profit on that. What do you think?
Yes, I'm sure that's true. I don't underrate the power of films. I think cinema is a very powerful medium. But the other thing about why it happened in the 60s, it's also just a matter of time. Because the first generation, the generation that actually experienced something horrible, on the whole don't want to talk about it. I mean, the people who do talk about it are usually people who didn't experience anything particularly horrible. But talking about it is very painful. If you were a Jewish survivor, and you came back from the camps, the last thing you wanted to do on the whole is talk about it, because then you'd be singled out again as somehow something special. Even if people said, oh, how terrible, and I feel so sorry for... The best novel about that is Faithless by Imre Kertész. I don't know if people have read it, a Hungarian, who was a teenager when he was in Buchenwald and Auschwitz. Obviously had a terrible time. He survived, he came back to Budapest, and the first thing people say to him is sort of first of all they said to him, well, you must have been through hell, and now you must forget about it and get on with life. And his reaction was, no, it wasn't hell, that was life. It was terrible, but it was life. But he didn't want to be singled out again as a sort of victim who had to be held up as an example or somebody to feel sorry for. I mean, the Jews were sick of being held up as examples of good or evil. They just wanted to blend back in again. It's the children. If you take France, for example, Serge Klarsfeld was a child of somebody who survived the Holocaust, and his father didn't. He was murdered. And his generation in the 60s was the first generation that was able to speak about it. And his wife, who was German, not Jewish, but from an ordinary German family, I think her father was in the Wehrmacht, was questioning her parents in the way that the parents themselves could not have done. And I mean, this is my question to either of you. I mean, after a dictatorship, it must be that something similar must be true as well. I mean, that it's not the generation that lived through Ceausescu as adults that are the first to really talk about it or look at it or talk about it critically, unless they have a political agenda. But it must be the children who start to question, you know? Or am I wrong?
No, I think it's totally right. The generation was adult during the last years of Ceausescu's regime. It's either becoming or maybe there's something wrong here, because I think they become very fierce anti-communist, despite the fact that during the time they were complying with the regime different ways, and after that it was kind of an overreaction. Maybe others would try to find somehow extremely complicated, how should I say, reasons to explain, and that's somehow to judge or to accuse anybody who survived that time in which way they could. But sometimes it's like we had, at least in the intellectual milieu, an idea which is called resistance to culture. So people said, well, we didn't fight the regime, but at least by reading Shakespeare and by writing about Shakespeare or Flaubert or doing music or making good art house films or good theater, this is our way to fight with the dictatorship, by doing culture, which is something very questionable in my point of view, but it's not something that I can judge because I didn't live to that time as an adult, and I didn't know what I would have done. Of course, we all like to think that, well, if I would be in that time, I would be a hero, but I'm sure it wouldn't be like that.
But I had a childhood experience, and I wonder if there are parallels there as well. That when I was at primary school, so that would have been about 10 years after the war, and I was at a private school with a very weak headmaster who had no control over the teachers. And as is often the case with primary schools, some of the teachers were absolute sadists. I mean, just horrible people who abused, and not sexually, but who abused the children in the most nasty manner. And two in particular, I remember with particular disgust. And I much later realized that these were all people who in one way or another had been damaged by the war. And one of the most awful teachers was a woman, called Mevrouw Soeterman, who I'm almost sure was Jewish. And she used a lot of Yiddish and so on, which was unusual at the time. And Soeterman sort of suggested, and I think she probably had a terrible war. And another man was near Hanks, who was in some ways even worse. I always had fantasies after leaving school that if I ever see him, I'd kick him in his balls. And I did see him once, and years later, I gave a lecture in Holland, and a shabby little man with a beard came up to me and said, "You don't remember who I am?" And I said, "No." And he fished out an old school photograph, and it was Meneer Heinz. And there were parents there, we were having a drink after the lecture, whose children had been withdrawn from the school because of what he did. And instead of kicking him in the balls, I sort of started showing him around like the Elephant Man. I said, you don't know who this is! to some of these parents. In any case, somebody asked him, not me, but somebody asked him apparently, why were you so horrible to the children? And he said, because of the war, I couldn't get a proper education and I was jealous of all you who could. Are there any parallels growing up after Ceausescu?
I didn't experience something similar or experience something that I can see in it a connection with. Probably there's a lot of frustration for many people, but I cannot.
Well, you know what happened in Japan is interesting. The whole generation of Oshima, the sort of 1960s filmmakers, the generation who had been children,
left-wing filmmakers, radical,
yeah.
Some of the films.
And one of they had a very complicated attitude to the West and America particularly. I mean, they loved it and they hated it at the same time. And they were children during the war, and so they were at school and they were told, they were given a militarist education. They were told the emperor was sacred, dying for the country was the highest ideal, and so on and so forth. Japan lost the war. The Americans came in. It was in many ways a very benign occupation, but they tried to change everything, the culture, the education, and so on and so forth. They didn't have enough resources to change all the school books, the textbooks, so they literally with magic ink, all the old propaganda was crossed out, and these same teachers who had been talking about the sacred emperor and dying for the country and so on, were told to teach about how wonderful democracy was and how America was the symbol of liberty and so on, which created an enormous distrust in Oshima's generation in any kind of authority, because they saw the same adults telling them one thing one day and completely the opposite the other, and that distrust of authority led to a lot of their sort of radicalism. And is there a parallel there?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we all know many intellectuals who were teachers of Marxism or economics in a communist way, and immediately after 2 weeks of the revolution started to teach the opposite. But I'm not sure we have created in the young people a distrust, maybe, but not big, because there was now things were not so harsh after the revolution like in Japan, as far as I know. Maybe I'm a little bit wrong. So we didn't have a lot of radical attitudes, at least in the arts, like Oshima's films. Nothing of sorts.
That's clear, I agree with you. History doesn't repeat itself in the same way. So in Romania, it seems to me that the second generation has a sort of sense of fatigue toward the recent past. And paradoxically, some of the most nostalgic people in Romania are youngsters up to 22, 24. Of course, they are influenced by their parents or their grandparents. But there is something strange with the new perception, especially on the communist past, but also on the other dictatorships, because Romania came in 1989 after 51 years of dictatorship. Please allow me to open the floor for discussion. So please, if you have questions or comments, please. There is a mic in the room. So we have there and here.
Yes, very short to this topic with soap opera, Holocaust, and so on. I was not in Germany in '68. I came there in 1891. But when Shoah was broadcasted in the German television, it was I think in ARD, the first channel, it has also a tremendous, huge impact. It's not the same, and only a kind of nuance. The normal Hollywood emotional production, they are not the kitsch of Andrew. It's another kind of standardized emotional product. It's part of the pop culture, and this naive dream to hope like the Godard generation that the filmmakers can educate intellectually the public. It didn't work, or it works with products of enormous high artistic or substantial level, like Schumann, but it's rare. So that, you know, as me today, the author films are only festival films, and they lost the battle with Hollywood. Yeah.
I will tell a little bit of something, because I'm not speaking about the standardized Hollywood sensibility and aesthetics. I think in the case of a series of Holocaust, which I've seen only part, I think it was lower, the kind of heavy emotion that was all the time displayed. I mean, I can understand Schindler's List, which I don't like at all actually, but I can see a point into that. More than in the miniseries.
It was a soap opera on the beginning of this genre in the also in the US.
Like you would say that Slave Isaura is a film about slavery in Brazil. And created the consciousness about the slavery.
Rather, yeah, the situation was like this. The fascism in Germany, it was a mass phenomenon. It's in the other side, the Stalinism in the Soviet Union, it was an intellectual phenomenon and not a mass phenomenon. The people only act as he believes in Stalinism. They didn't believe it, only the intellectuals. But in Germany it was a mass phenomenon. More than 90% of the population of Germany were for a long period admirers of Hitler and his ideology. And all these people, after the war, it was a big silence against this. They were proud to win the Soccer World Cup in '54 as a kind of revenge of the lost war, and then to prove that with German work quality they did the economic miracle, and to enjoy this petit bourgeois pleasures of the American system. So, and this series, the Holocaust, was made an impact about this kind of people, and opened then
I mean, all of a sudden they saw the Holocaust miniseries and changed their political views to...
Yeah, no, okay.
No, they didn't change their political views necessarily. They might still have been politically conservative. But before that, there were all kinds of excuses about the Holocaust. No, this is just foreign propaganda and leftist. No, it can't have been as bad as people say. We Germans would never do such a thing. Nobody knew. Well, the Jews must have done something to deserve this. There were all these excuses. And by being able to imagine through soap opera what it was like for people who were being persecuted for no other reason than because they were born Jewish, for a lot of people it was shocking. And they couldn't make the excuses anymore. And that's about as much as you can hope for when you show people the past. It's not the scholarly details of the past that are going to teach people anything. It is those very basic questions.
first of all, a few remarks. As you already know, I think it's like in advertising. You're more convincing when you tell a story. So I think telling a story with detailed characters is more convincing. For me, seeing this movie, I don't know very much about that period in France history, but seeing this movie was more impactful for me than reading a historical book or an article. I know French are quite good at they have exquisite historians and political philosophers, but this movie is different and is more impactful. I don't know if I would go home and read serious work about that period, but it raised an interest for me. And also some remarks about both sides you are mentioning, because you have a lot of topics and subjects. No, that's good. You've mentioned those both sides, majority and the minority. I don't know exactly, I don't know the article of Mr. Pleșu, but I think I was on the side of the minority as an option, although I'm on majority side. I mean, I'm straight, but I was on the other side. So I think Mr. Pleșu was referring at both sides, not as a minority side or a majority side, but to also those who choose to boycott the referendum, also even if they were not gay or homosexuals. So I think this is both sides. And about the way different generations are seeing our communist part, because I was 20 years in 1989. I wasn't, my parents weren't dissidents. I wasn't doing anything against communism. I don't know why, maybe I felt somehow guilty, but I have two young boys, 20 and 22 years old, and my eldest one accused us, me and his father, also we are against communism and we are protesters, usually protesters. You were the one who built communism. I didn't understand why me. It wasn't me. I didn't do anything to support communism. But it's true, young people, teenagers and young people 24, 18, 25 are somehow supporting Ceausescu and some nostalgic ideas, and also they are more in favor of Russia and Putin than other generation. There are polls, serious polls attesting this, yes. And
so
it's
I don't have a feeling that the nostalgia or the support for Putin or admiration for Putin is among the young people and not among
it comes from polls.
It's transgenerational, I think.
Yeah, but it's strange for them. I can understand a person who's 60, 70 years old and feels such a nostalgia, but I can't understand them. Sorry.
Probably, if Ceausescu had never existed, your children would still have criticized you for one reason or another.
Yes,
so I wouldn't worry about it too much.
And maybe I realized that maybe my son was right. Without my attitude, communism wouldn't have been possible. But he was right.
I feel so guilty about it.
No, he was right. Okay. And about this movie, because I think your movie is about the Roma people and the Holocaust. The topics is not. It's also about intolerance and prejudices. So it's more general, because you can find intolerance and prejudices and killing people for their ideas and for what they are, all throughout the history, unfortunately, as you've already told. So I think your movies.
You have a question for Mr. Buruma?
I still have a question for you, because I was wondering where is the pain and where is the mercy in your movies?
Sorry, the what?
The pain and the mercy.
Where is it in the film?
In the film we've seen and also in your movies.
Well, I don't know. I cannot see the point of the question, to be honest, and so I cannot answer it. I think
It's in the third minute of the second scene.
One can answer that. I think actually I would just make a small addition. I think my reaction was a little bit maybe too aggressive regarding our discussion regarding soap opera. I think I understand why, because anytime you go to a market of projects or you meet foreign producers or television people or I don't know, there's a lot of decision makers regarding giving money for films. It's like a mantra. They say, I want something big and emotional. I want the people. Really, it's terrible because all these people who are giving the money, it's all the time. It's like robots. It's the same thing. Make a soap opera, basically.
Yeah, no, I
So maybe this is why my reaction is even you are like that.
No, I would never ask you to make a soap opera. So I totally understand.
This was my reason. So.
Thank you. My name is Sorin Ionica. I'm not a historian or a visual artist, and I wouldn't have spoken, but you touch a very important
Although you
topic.
have
I have a camera, that's amateur, ignore it. You touch a very sensitive and important topic, I think, which is very much ignored, and this is a comparison of the second generations after dictatorship in the two countries, Germany and Romania. And I think the diagnostic here was true. I'm not really sure the explanation was very much true, but we don't have research, so we only speculate, and this is Romania. Nobody's very serious to go to see what the causes are. We just like to speculate. Obviously, the diagnostic is real. The people in Romania who came into adulthood after 2000 live in a complete historic amnesia. They don't care about this historical past. There's a shocking difference from the generation that you discussed, the 60s in Germany. They challenge their parents, not very much, but on completely different issues, not on this. It's true, some of them, and you can see it in our students, actually, they tend to lean to the left politically. But not because they like Ceausescu, they have no idea about that, but because they learn it from the peers in the West. And probably this is part of the explanation, because every age cohort in Romania, we westernized so fast, we want to be part of it, European Union, everything, so every age cohort copied the behavior. You know, corporatists want to be like German corporatists, and middle-aged people families wanted to copy what happened in France, and the youngsters, they do what they see in the peers in the West, and that is, Chavista attitudes and, putting on dress with Che Guevara, and nothing to do with Ceausescu. They have no idea who Ceausescu was and what happened actually. So it's a completely different mechanism, I think. And that should give us pause to think.
But what kind of left is it? Because there's the sort of economic...
New left, new Marxism.
Piketty and that kind of thing. Not the gender and that kind of thing.
It's everything now, but don't over-rationalize, because people don't read books. And here we're going into a very long discussion, and I don't want to be, to sound like an old man who grumbles about the old generation, but I'm doing it anyway. So it's not about books or they pick up articles from very superficial sources. It is Piketty as well, for people who read books, for students who are interested. It's also about the gender rights, it's about everything. So there are many channels of transmission, but I don't think they are very nostalgic about the 80s or the 70s. not at all, or challenging their parents about what happened there. It would be good if it happened, but not.
But I think this is something that should be discussed because I'm not sure that the people who you say are on the left now, the young people are nostalgia for Ceausescu. It's a problem to be on the left.
What I'm saying.
But is it a problem to be on the left?
This is what I'm saying. What you see is what I'm saying.
Well, no, but you mentioned like it's a problem.
I didn't see it. I'm saying they are copying attitudes from the left.
There are people who copy attitudes from Putin's Russia. I mean, the Orthodox Church. Yeah.
Obviously, we stand a bit differently politically.
May I
No, let's see that. Yeah.
excuse me, is it okay if I speak in French? Because I'm not trying to do it in English. Is it okay?
Yeah, but please stand. We want to hear you better. Stand.
To stand?
Yeah, please stand up.
Okay.
I must say that Bogdan is a wonderful actor from France. And he acted in my last film, which is not out yet.
Beside that, so, je vais changer au français parce que c'est plus facile pour moi. Déjà répondre ponctuellement juste à monsieur et après vous poser une question par rapport au film qu'on a vu. C'est très compliqué aujourd'hui, je vous le dis comme je le pense sincèrement, d'entendre. C'est mieux comme ça? La distance est meilleure. Je vous disais que je fais partie d'une génération qui n'a pas vécu le communisme, ça c'est sûr, et je ne veux pas m'exprimer au nom des gens qui sont nés à la même époque, mais c'est très compliqué d'entendre aujourd'hui que la génération jeune, elle est inexistante, qu'elle a du mal à lire, qu'elle a du mal à faire des recherches, qu'elle a du mal à comprendre le passé. Juste vous dire que peut-être que vous avez des expériences avec des étudiants qui ont du mal à faire ces choses, mais nous sommes là et nous essayons de gérer avec le passé en Europe. Et c'est très compliqué parce que nous avons sur la table un dossier assez chargé, assez difficile, qui ont été ces 50 ans de communisme. Et c'est là où je voulais en venir par rapport à la discussion que vous avez ouverte. Et notamment par rapport au rapport que nous avons avec le passé, que ce soit à travers des écrits d'historiens, que ce soit à travers des objets artistiques, théâtre, cinéma, art visuel, etc. Ce qui se passe, c'est que, en tant que citoyen roumain né à la fin des années 80, en 86, et qui n'a pas vécu le communisme, qui n'est pas complètement ancré dans cette génération qui vit dans le capitalisme agressif, sauvage, appelez-le comme on veut, mais qui a pris ce moment charnière de changement de système entre 50 ans de silence, de dictature et un basculement agressif vers le capitalisme, c'est très compliqué de comprendre le passé. Parce que, personnellement, j'ai l'impression que chaque génération a envie de parler d'elle. Et de 47 jusqu'en 89, il y a eu plusieurs générations. Il y a eu nos grands-parents, il y a eu nos parents, il y a eu nous-mêmes. Et je crois quand même, au sein de ma famille, c'est compliqué de mettre autour de la table mes grands-parents. Pardon. Je reprends. C'est compliqué de mettre à table mes grands-parents avec leur expérience après la guerre, et comme vous disiez, même pour ces gens qui ont vécu l'occupation de la France, comment on deal avec l'histoire, comment on s'arrange pour rester vivant et pour survivre au final. Après, il y a les parents qui essaient de couvrir un peu les grands-parents pour dire oui, mais ils ont fait à leur façon, il faut que tu puisses comprendre que c'était compliqué, malgré leur choix, malgré les difficultés qu'ils avaient au quotidien. Et après, tu arrives et tu essaies de comprendre. Et c'est compliqué. C'est très compliqué. C'est pour ça que quand je vois un film comme celui qu'on a vu, qui est un film créé en 69, qui a été plus ou moins interdit, on va dire, pour le dire vite et mal, en France, ma question aujourd'hui, ce serait qu'est-ce que ça donnerait un film comme celui qu'on a vu dans la France d'aujourd'hui, dans une France où Marine Le Pen arrive au deuxième tour avec un pourcentage inquiétant, où les extrêmes droites sont au pouvoir de plus en plus présents dans les gouvernements, que ce soit en Hollande, que ce soit en France, etc. Quel serait l'impact d'un tel film pour une génération que j'ai côtoyée en arrivant en France en 2008, un an après l'adhésion de la Roumanie à l'Union européenne, et qui comme vous le disiez, avait un peu une image un peu romantique de la résistance, du fait que tout le monde a essayé de faire en sorte que les Allemands ne puissent pas rester, que les Allemands ne puissent pas s'infiltrer dans le système politique. Et au final, quand je vois ce film, j'avoue que je n'ai pas pu voir que la première partie, mais je me dis, ce sont des témoignages des gens qui ont vécu. Ça pourrait être mes grands-parents qui ont vécu à cette époque-là le communisme de l'autre côté du mur, un peu plus tard. C'est extrêmement émouvant de voir que ces gens doivent régler leurs problèmes ici, maintenant, avec des réalités extrêmement compliquées. Et je crois que le jugement de moi, la génération d'aujourd'hui, qui vit dans une Europe par rapport au passé, ce serait beaucoup moins simpliste que certaines critiques qu'on peut se prendre aujourd'hui dans la gueule. Je le dis comme je le pense, parce que nous sommes une génération qui ne peut pas comprendre ou qui ne va pas à la rencontre de leur passé. Voilà, pardon pour l'émotion, elle est
Well, first of all, I think it's a great mistake for a generation that hasn't had the same experience as the past to judge people in the past. In the second part of the film, which you didn't see, Anthony Eden is asked whether he thought the French did the right thing to condemn Marshal Pétain. And he said, I haven't lived through an occupation, so I'm in no position to judge. And I think that's very wise. And I think one of the mistakes that a lot of young people now make, especially in the United States, but probably in other countries, is to look at the past entirely from the point of view of the present and judge it and condemn it for all the ways in which people didn't think or didn't behave in the way that people do now, which I think is a huge mistake. But what you can learn from the past, whether it's a documentary film or whether it's reading Stendhal, I mean, after all, we haven't lived under Napoleon either, but you do learn a lot about how human beings behave in certain circumstances and how they feel and think and so on. And that understanding helps you to understand your own period, I think. And I would say one thing to your point, I would be very careful with criticizing people for being influenced by ideas from other places, because I think you should judge ideas on whether they are right or wrong, not where they come from. After all, this is what people in dictatorships always say. In China, for example, if a Chinese says we want more democracy, oh, that's just Western propaganda, our culture doesn't have that same tradition, so shut up. I don't think that's the right response. Right. Right.
Hi, my name is Mircea, and I'm I live in Germany for the last 25 years, and I want to point some small details on Germany after the Second World War. So I think that the Germans need to survive the first 15 years after the war. So they had not 1 million refugees like they had in 2015. They had 5 or 6 million refugees. They had to rebuild Germany. They had the problems, what is Germany itself. They had a lot of discussion in 1956 when they rebuilt the army, because they didn't want a new army. However, you're right, 1961, the condemnation of Adolf Eichmann in Jerusalem started the whole, what they call in Geschichtsverarbeitung. So, I think the Germans have done a good job. They're still working on this one. And I'm not of your opinion. They are doing a lot of great movies, which they are really fiction movies about the Second World War. And I recommend you about questioning what have you done, your father, your mother, during the Second World War. It's called Our Father, Our Mothers. It's a 6 hours movie in 2013.
But I never said I'm against the fiction films about the past. I was speaking about something else, about the type of films or about the artistic level, so to speak.
It is the vehicle which, because if you're reading really the older reports of the Holocaust, it's pretty dry. If you don't make it a bit more human to show them there were humans, there were human tragedies there, the people won't understand that.
Okay.
Thank you.
I was just thinking about what was said before about the way in which we represent the past, and I keep thinking about something that I've seen earlier today. We had a program here, I'm part of the festival, so we had a program here of documentary films produced by the film studio, which was the only documentary film studio of socialist Romania, and we keep screening these films every year for the past 7 years. And today, because this year we are 30 years after December 1989, we screened 2 films which were shot exactly during December 1989. One of them is something which colloquially is known as the first free journal. It was shot by by these documentaries in late December. But also another film, which is called On Christmas Day We Took Our Portion of Freedom, and which is a film built entirely on a soundtrack, which consists of voices, recordings of questions posed by various Romanian citizens at the end of December, between the 27th and the 28th December, no, 25th and 27th December, at a specific phone number provided by the new government, which was being formed then, so providing for them to ask questions that they considered important. And what was important at the time was the need to see that Ceausescu was dead. And this makes me think about how important, how vulnerable on the one hand is the film image, but also how important it can be at certain times. So all these people are calling this number to ask whether they could actually see the tape. We all know that, the ones of us who were, well, at a certain age, say, in December 1989, we remember that evening when the new television was promising that we are going to see the tape with the death of Ceausescu. So an entire country caused throughout 2 days and nights at the studio asking, when can we see the tape? We want to see the tape with the dead man.
Well, this is the country of Dracula.
No, it's not so easy. Anyway, at the end of the film, there is a lady who says, you know, we have to keep these images of the dead Ceausescu, and also we have to gather together all the images that we have of Ceausescu throughout the years. And because we have such great directors, we are going to make a wonderful film about, and horrifying film about this Ceausescu, which will then act as a great indictment. Nobody will ever want communism after they will see that film. And I every time when I hear this, I keep thinking, oh, but Andrei Mujica has made that film in 2010, and look what happened. Because he made the film so many years after December 1989, when completely different rhetorical tools were available to him, and also that the entire memorial regime had changed. So the film that Mujica had made in 2010, the so-called autobiography of Ceausescu, was regarded by many, sadly in my opinion, as something pro-Ceausescu. So these things are really complicated. I'm not sure whether you've seen the film, but your 2 colleagues have certainly seen that. And I was wondering...
even discussed it in New York.
Oh, really? I didn't know. So I was just wondering...
Just talking.
What do you think about this? Because I keep thinking, how do we represent the past? We also represent the past with the rhetorical tools that are available to us at one specific time. There are certain ways in which we can talk about the past at a given time, and there are other ways in which we can't. One more thing, thinking about Romanian documentary, we didn't have any self-reflexivity in Romanian documentary for at least 15 years after 1989, because people were not communicating with the kind of documentary that was being made abroad. So nobody wanted to refer to themselves until they started traveling and kind of becoming acquainted with how you can tell a story from other, other contexts.
Well, I cannot. What troubles me more actually is the fact that this kind of question that the people have had regarding seeing Ceausescu filmed which is a pure cinematic impulse in a way, because cinema makes you see reality, makes you see. That's the power of it. But I think things change from a, let's say, ontological point of view after the digital image. So I think now if you would see a digital image of, I don't know, it's what happens every day on Facebook or on YouTube or on internet, everybody questions the images. Everybody knows how easy it is to trick them, how easy it is to falsify them, how easy it is to... And remember we had this demonstration where the police were more brutal on the 10th of August, and all of a sudden there were hundreds of clips showing the brutality of police, the unnecessary brutality of Romanian police, and many, the immediate answer of the power was they are fake. It's not a real, they do not correctly represent reality because they are made up afterwards, which is not true, but it could be true because we know how easy it is to alter the images now. So for me, this is a question which I don't have an answer, but it's really something that troubles me because the relationship of the image with reality changed. In a way, we still think and we still see the images like 50 years ago, but it's not the same. From an ontological point of view, it's totally not the same image. So this is the only thing I can think about this the image which proves the existence of a reality. I mean, if in 1989 people wanted that, I don't think it would be the same now. I think if they would see it now, Ceausescu being shot, everybody would ask, is it made up or is it for real? Like it happened in a very small way with Băsescu's tape hitting the child. Nobody knows if it's made up or not. Really, you cannot tell.
They were still asking at that time. They were still asking. So somebody calls and asks, please check why did Ceausescu have a light-colored eyes? Because actually he had black eyes. Maybe it's not him. So there was some distrust, but it's interesting that we were still...
Yeah, but less than it is now, and it's more justified to have it now, you know. This is something that nobody can actually, I think, I don't know if somebody can answer to this problem. Maybe you. Because it's something I'm always asking, and we discussed it a little bit before, briefly. I always ask Adrian, who's a historian, what historians will do in 20 years, 30 years from now, when they will look back. For instance, you know, I gave this example. 20 years ago there was a website called Clouds Magazine, Revista Nori, a magazine, an online magazine of art, literature, this kind of thing, photographs, and it doesn't exist anymore, and there's no trace of it on the internet. So if I would be a historian trying to locate or trying to make something about that magazine, it's more impossible now than it is for me to find an image in the Sahia archive from 50 years ago or to find a newspaper from the 1930s.
But Romania doesn't have a web archive like the UK has.
No, but even the web archive
all countries
doesn't
an archive.
And it's the same with emails and letters.
Yes,
One of the
that's
great
right.
sources of history is that we have letters. But who's going to remember emails? They're all going to disappear.
And this is what I'm asking Adrian all the time. How will you make history?
Yeah, but during the war, half of the state archives were destroyed, so it's the same situation. We have to imagine the new ways of archiving things, of proving the authenticity, because I saw the discussion on the archived images and films. There are no common standards. Sometimes an archived film may differ from different archives with 10 minutes more or less, or with change parts and so on. It's an ongoing discussion, so we don't have standards for the moment. So, other questions? I think we did well. Yeah, we did well, and we did enough. So thanks for coming. Thanks for having patience and the interest in the discussion. Thanks, Mr. Buruma and Mr.